I think my grandma has this dress.
No, neither.
I feel like Harry Potter. Too librarian. Too Bono?
No.
No. No. Big no.
Yes.
I look a little bit like a bumblebee. How long you been in these parts?
Blah, if sadness had a color. I bought this? Your Honor, I object.
No. This is so much like my dad.
That is the ticket.
KQED Live comes from Berkeley Rep.
Disproportionate impact of
More than half of black business owners.
And disproportionate.
Somehow we always find a way to rise.
To the blueprint builders, to the backbones of every block, for the curators of the culture, and for generations to follow. You might fall, but never fail. Keep rising, keep rising, keep rising. Apply for business, marketing, and tech makeovers on us.
So glad I'm flying out of Oakland today. Let's count the reasons why. For one, flying locally reduces my carbon footprint. Plus, my airport supports over 17,000 jobs in the East Bay. And it makes sense. The more I fly from OAK, the more flights airlines will add out of OAK. All good.
No matter where you live in the Bay Area, there are many great reasons to pick OAK and fly the East Bay way. What you do with that extra hour is up to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to give that succulent away at the end of this, so just get psyched. My name is Sarah Rose Leonard. I'm a live events producer here at KQED. I'm really excited you're all here. For those of you joining us for the first time, KQED is Northern California's PBS and NPR member station, and KQED Live is our new multi-platform program that produces screenings, talks, performances, and food tastings based on KQED's mission to inform, inspire, and involve. You can learn more at kqed.org/live. So we want to thank our season sponsors that make KQED Live possible. We have the Asian Art Museum, Berkeley Rep, Comcast Business, and Oakland International Airport, who you saw out there in the lobby. If you want any free swag, they have it. We are so grateful for their commitment to supporting our mission of civic and cultural engagement in the Bay Area. If KQED brings value to your everyday life via the radio, TV, or streaming, I want to encourage you to consider becoming a KQED member. You can find out how at kqed.org/donate. We'd really like to thank the Bay Area Science Festival for partnering with us on this event. They are having a festival that runs through April 30th, and we'll include a link to them in the chat and a post-show email you'll get. Tonight's event is hosted by Danelle Venton, who's a science reporter who covers wildfire in California extensively. She suggested that we set the mood for managing fire season with a drought-friendly succulent giveaway. And I totally forgot to get a name. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna close my eyes and you're all gonna wave. And the first hand I see waving the most enthusiastically is who's to get the succulent, okay? I'm gonna close my eyes, hold on. And you're just gonna come up and get it for me. Thank you for the lights, Danny. Okay, I'm gonna open them now. Oh my God, sorry, you with is that a hat? Yeah, that was a great wave. Come on out. Thank you so much for that really excellent interpretation. Enjoy. Awesome. So I'm gonna welcome Danelle and Robert Simmon to the stage now. Please give them a warm welcome. Thank you.
Wow, happy to see so many people here. Thank you all for coming. We are so excited to talk to you tonight about wildfires and space and satellites. My name is Danelle Venton. I'm a science reporter here at KQED. I cover a lot of wildfires. I've been covering wildfires every year since 2015. I'm also really interested in oceans and ocean health, and then I do a little bit of space coverage. So tonight is really exciting because I get to combine my love of talking about fires and wildfire resilience with space.
My name is Robert Simmon. I work for Planet, and we are headquartered right here in San Francisco. We are a satellite data and analytics company, and what that means is we build and operate our own constellation of satellites, and we monitor the entire Earth every day at the resolution of about a house. Before working at Planet, I was at NASA and started back when CD-ROMs were still a thing. And if you bought the first couple generations of iPhone, the lock screen was an image that I had made while I was at NASA. So I do data visualization. The short explanation is I turn numbers into pictures. The slightly longer explanation is that I try to explain very complex and esoteric subjects to non-experts in a visual way.
And why this is a really good partnership between KQED and Planet is because we use their imagery kind of as much as we can. Satellites are an incredibly powerful tool for understanding wildfires, wildfire prevention. We also use it in our reporting on snowpack, droughts. The applications are just immense.
So I mentioned that Planet is a satellite company, and we build our satellites right here in San Francisco. This photograph was taken on 2nd Street. And you can see the baby, which gives you a fairly good sense of the scale of a satellite, as well as the model there. That's not a scale model. That's actually 1-to-1 with the real size. We have a constellation of just over 200 of these. And as I said, they take an image of almost the whole Earth's land surface every day at a medium resolution. And that's complemented by a high resolution constellation, which can see individual cars. If the conditions are perfect, you can kind of see the shadow of a person. But those are targeted. So they're specific times and places that you take an image, as opposed to the medium resolution where we're doing things regularly in what's called a monitoring constellation. So why do we use satellites to monitor fires? Well, one reason is because we can see the whole world. So this is an image from a weather satellite, and it covers the entire hemisphere at once, and has the resolution of 1 kilometer per pixel, which is about an entire city block. The big advantage of this type of satellite is at that resolution, it can image up to once a minute. And so you can see weather patterns, you can see fires evolve, and things like that. And this is a NOAA satellite, so a US government satellite. Zooming in a little bit, this is a little bit higher resolution, and you are now starting to get into the regional scale. And these types of images are taken twice a day in many, many different wavelengths of light. And so you can start to see things and do applications like distribute fire resources to like firefighters to fight fires over a large scale, sort of the national scale. And then we can zoom to 30 meters per pixel. This is another government satellite. And this is more of the city or regional scale. And then this is an image from one of Planet's satellites, literally something that size, where you can see individual houses. KQED is in there. And again, we take these every single day, which allows us to monitor the landscape and prepare before a fire, monitor the fires as they happen, and then be able to see the damage caused by a fire so we can remediate it afterwards. And then the high resolution satellites, which are looking at the individual cars, details of buildings, and this really gives you the zoomed in view for very important areas or for like military intelligence work and things like that. And today we are going to talk about fire in California and fire in the West. So this is a map where all of the gray that you see is about the last 100 years of fires in California. And you can kind of see that anywhere where there's trees has burned over that time. And the ecosystems in California evolved with fire and need fire to survive. Unfortunately, the way that we, and by we I mean Europeans generally, that colonized California 300 or 400 years ago, have managed this landscape in a way that's actually inhibiting the forest's ability to survive and be okay during a fire. And you can see that if you look at just the fires from last summer, 2021. And these fires are gigantic. They are in unprecedented size. They start earlier than ever. And they do more damage than they have before. And we're going to talk about 5 fires in particular. The Willow Fire in Big Sur, the Easy Fire in Southern California, the Caldor Fire near Tahoe, the Camp Fire that swept through Paradise in 2018, and then the Bootleg Fire in Southern Oregon.
And so if I can just give a little bit of a preview, we're going to take you through one fire looking at the progression of the fire through satellite images, and then we're going to talk about some of these other fires and how you can, lessons that you can learn after the fire has gone through. Because at KQED, we're really interested in talking not just about fires as they're happening, but wildfire resilience and preventing truly catastrophic fires.
So this is the area of the Willow Fire. It's just inland in Big Sur. It's the exact same scale that you saw of that image of San Francisco. So imagine most of the peninsula all in one shot. And this is 2 days before a fire started in mid-June of 2021. Before summer really started. So this is really early. Fire season in California tends to be a bit later. And so that's one of the things that's happening with climate change and the way we've managed forests, that they're happening earlier than ever before. This is 3 days later on the 18th, and this was right when the fire started and began to spread. And you can see the smoke plume, and then you can start to see where the gray or brown area is where the landscape has been burned. Next day, fire continues to spread. And then on the third day, it's reached what was pretty close to its maximum extent. And there's one thing I want to draw your attention to. In the sort of towards the bottom right of the image, there's a little rainbow of series of dots. And that's actually an aircraft that was dropping flame retardant on the fire when we took this image. And you can see the rim of the red flame retardant circling the fire. And that was laid along the ridge lines. And it's a way to sort of suppress the fires in a place where they're least likely to move forward. And that's one of the ways of managing a fire after it started. And then this is the next day when the fire was largely contained. You can see a little bit of lingering smoke, one plume, but you can really see that flame retardant that rims the entire fire. And now we're going to start to look at one of the other reasons that we like to use satellite imagery, and that's because we can start to look in wavelengths of light that are not visible to us. So this is an image that has near-infrared light in it, and vegetation reflects very strongly in near-infrared. And this is light that's just a little bit redder than red, if you will, so longer wavelength. And what it allows you to do is get this really precise picture of vegetation health and vegetation density. And so you can really see the areas of the burn scar in tan, where the landscape was severely affected, and then some other areas that are within that perimeter of the fire. If you go back to the map of the grays, everything in there was considered to be part of the fire, but it doesn't mean that it all burned in the same intensity. And so you'll see a few more of those near-infrared images. And the really important thing to remember is that healthy vegetation is bright red. So it's not on fire, it's not damaged. That's actually a sign of the remaining intact trees.
So to drive that home, here's a false color image of Half Dome. Should be pretty familiar to a lot of us. Rocks are still gray, the snow is white, but the trees are bright red. So when you see that bright red, just think bright green. So as we talked about, wildfires are a natural part of California's ecosystem, the ecosystem of the whole West, of course. But these mega fires do not have to be part of the ecosystem of our reality. Today, fires are being made worse. Fire and their impacts are being made worse by 3 things. Climate change, so it's hotter, it's drier. 150 years of fighting fires, so putting fires out and not allowing them to consume vegetation that they normally would. And then where and how we live. More people live in the path of fire. And as we will see, homes are often the most flammable thing in the landscape. The good news is that we can act on all of those fronts. This is a picture of Yosemite in 1899. Native people set this area on fire. Lightning strikes also did some of that work. We know from looking at the scars of tree rings in the Sierra that fires moved through about every 7 to 12 years. There are areas where that was more frequent, especially if Native people were lighting fires to encourage grazing, to promote plants that they would gather, plants that they would eat. And there are cases where there were permanent villages and the area around would be burned every about 2 years or so to protect from fires. This use of fire happened all over the West, all over the world really, and was the indigenous primary way of managing land. Settlers arrived here and found what they described as a paradise. Beautiful, productive land, big open forests that you could walk through just with your arms outstretched, meadows filled with flowers, abundant animal life, and they did not understand the role that fire played in the ecosystem. They removed native people from the land forcibly and forcibly stopped burning practices. And took away that stewardship of the land that had been here for tens of thousands of years. And so this is what Yosemite looks like today. A lot more trees. I'll go back one. More natural state and today. Researchers from UC Berkeley recently published a study that found that in the Sierra, there are now 6 to 7 times as many trees as there were at the turn of the last century. And these are smaller trees. On average, the tree size is less than half of what it was. Smaller trees are less resilient to wildfires. Bigger trees are much more able to survive them. So lots of little trees all competing for what water there is. That primes the conditions for the kind of fires that we saw last summer and that I'm afraid we will also see this summer. So if we want to take action on fires, there are many things that we can do. We can start clearing away vegetation, twigs, the stuff that fuels fires. We can reintroduce fire through prescribed burning. We can support indigenous burning practices. We can retrofit existing homes so that they are more hardened to homes, and we can improve fire standards for new homes that are built. We can also decide not to build in dangerous areas. And we can act on climate change, of course. If you're interested in that, I would really recommend a KQED Live event that was given by my wonderful coworker, Laura Clivens, in February, and she just did a remarkable job. I found it incredibly inspiring. If we do those things, it would make life better for the men and women who fight our fires every year. We see here a briefing at a fire. You can see a map, satellite data, like planet generates is used in those maps. And taking action on fires would also make our lives better. It would mean healthier land, healthier air, healthier water. I want to show you a picture. I love this photo. These are some hot shots. These are incredibly hardworking people. These are elite backcountry fires, and this photo was taken fighting the Dixie Fire near Lassen last summer. These two gentlemen in the middle with chainsaws, these are sawyers. They are essentially fighting fires by doing landscaping. That is largely how these wildland fires are fought, by moving vegetation away and building lines of containment. Now, you can do that work in advance, and it makes it easier. For everyone. So there was a very dramatic example last summer of an area that had done a ton of work preparing for big fires, and it was put to the test. So this is an image of the Caldor Fire approaching South Lake Tahoe. You can see the lake here in the upper right corner, and this fire. Did you want to talk about this?
Sure.
Want to talk about this slide at all?
So this was really an image, again, taken by a satellite exactly this size. At the height of the Caldor Fire, as it had burned over the Sierra Crest, it's actually only the second fire in California history to go over the top of the Sierras, which are generally pretty barren and hard to burn. The other one was the Dixie Fire, which was also last summer, so completely unprecedented fire season. But you can see the size of this fire, and you can see the intensity of this fire. With the height of the smoke plumes, the opacity of the smoke plumes that are completely covering the landscape. So this fire was being driven by very strong winds towards the populated areas of South Lake Tahoe.
And at about the time that this image was taken, there were 3,500 firefighters assigned to this fire, and it was extremely resistant to containment. It was jumping lines. and it was just burning in terrible conditions. And as it was approaching South Lake Tahoe, I spoke with people who were really worried about what would happen. There was some concern that this would possibly wipe out large sections of the town. But there was also this knowledge that a ton of preparation work, treatment, preparing forests that were around homes for fire had been done. And so it really wasn't clear what would happen. This is taken before the fire, just to orient you a little bit. This squiggly line here on the left is Echo Pass. The Pacific Crest Trail goes right through here. This is Fallen Leaf Lake up here in the left corner. This is Christmas Valley, and the road that goes off to the lower right is Highway 89. This is the Myers area. And so treatments had been done, thinning the forest all around these homes in this area and also around these neighborhoods. And so this is what this view looked like after the fire. So you can see that the fire approached here from the west, jumped over this valley, and kind of was off to the races again and continued that way. But these neighborhoods in Christmas Valley and around Myers were largely intact, which was such a relief. And it was largely a product of the work of nonprofits like the Tahoe Conservancy, working in coordination with the local Forest Service unit, that made that possible, these landscape treatments. I went up to visit the burn scar after and took this photograph from coming down Echo Pass. So you can see here in this foreground area where these trees were burned, pretty intensively, and then the fire hit treated areas that had been thinned, and there's a break in vegetation right here for some power lines in this lower portion, and then all of these trees are still living, and those homes survived. The fire actually spotted, an ember was pushed by the wind across the valley, and so it ignited over here. And I wanted to see an area where there had been a firefight on the ground near some homes. And so there was a pretty dramatic example of that in the Myers area. So I'm going to show you a zoom in of that. And look how close the fire got to these homes. I mean, it was all burning in here, and then there are these neighborhoods right there that firefighters were able to protect. It was in this zone that the fire went from being a crown fire, burning the tops of trees, to being closer to the ground. This is an image of a crown fire. There were reports of flame lengths of 100 feet to 150 feet, and that is a fire that you cannot get close to. You have to move in advance of it. Try to do back burns, which is when you burn a section, or some of that landscaping, moving vegetation away, trying to create an area that will not burn. Here's a picture of one of the homes that we just saw by satellite. A dozer line had been put in here, which is an area of scraped bare dirt put in by a bulldozer, kind of as a in worst case scenario, last ditch effort. But it was not needed, because if you turn around from where you are and look the other direction uphill, this is what you see. And it was in this area that the fire went from being really tall, big, can't approach it, to being lower, 20 or 30 foot flame lengths, which is calm enough that firefighters could go direct with it. So an important point to get across is that the treatments did not stop the fire, but they laid the conditions for firefighters to be able to get a handle on it. And a lot of these trees are still alive. This forest kind of looked, in this section, sort of like what you would want from a prescribed burn. Trees are still alive, ground cleared up. If you want to know what a prescribed burn looks like, I have some pictures for you. This is a briefing from a burn that I attended last June in the Klamath Basin near the town of Orleans, which is the headquarters of the Karuk tribe. This is Scott Steinbring giving the marching orders for the day. He's the fire director or the fire officer for the Karuk tribe. He's talking about weather, safety measures, who's going to do what, any backup safety plans. This crew is from the local Karuk Fire Department. They've got their drip cord torches. They've got smiles on their faces. Being on a prescribed fire is a really joyful mood. It's not like being on a wildfire. Prescribed fires are really fun, and everyone is really, just happy to see happy with the work that they're doing there. After the briefing and a bunch of safety checklists, you light a test fire. This is a test fire to see how it's burning, to see if the fire is behaving the way it's expected to. And you can see all these people are there to hold it and to put it out in case it's unexpected. A big goal for this fire was to have it back down this embankment and clear out some invasive Himalayan blackberry to provide more space between some of the big trees, and then also to protect the town of Orleans. So if the area had been impacted by a wildfire this summer and had approached from this direction, it would have been protected. There was not a wildfire that was impacted that area this summer, but to the northeast of here, near the headwaters of the Klamath, there was a really bad wildfire, the Bootleg Fire, and there was a very dramatic example of prescribed fires providing some protective benefit there.
So now we're moving across the border into southern Oregon. And this is Sycan Marsh, which is land owned by the Nature Conservancy. And it is a real-world laboratory where researchers are trying out different treatments for the landscape to see which ones best protect the forest and sort of restore that either natural or the older human-managed landscape. And so what you're seeing now is an area on the right, that's all marsh, so it's really low-lying vegetation and not really flammable. But on the left-hand side of the image and in the center of the image is the forests. And in the upper center part, these are the lab forest. And so there's a bunch of different sections of forest, and they've all been treated in different ways. And so that's either going through with chainsaws and mechanically removing things, burning the underbrush and all the fuel, the leaf litter that falls down on the bottom in the prescribed burns, or a combination of the two, and trying to figure out, what's the best way to prepare these forests for the inevitable fire. And this was taken in 2019, right before a prescribed burn. And again, it's the exact same scale and resolution of the images of San Francisco and the images of the Willow Fire. So that kind of gives you a sense of how large the area is. This is during the burn. And so this is in October of 2019.
During a prescribed fire.
Right. Yeah. And you can see how much lower intensity the fire is. It takes place when the conditions are known, there's more moisture, and the fire keeps under control and burns just the areas that are intended to by the land managers. And you can tell, just the plumes aren't as high, the smoke isn't as intense, and it leaves behind a landscape looking like this. And the things you should notice is where the burn occurred, which again is that top middle region. The landscape kind of looks like it's been damaged a little bit because there's brown, and that's from the ground where it was burned. The tree cover isn't nearly as dense, and it's kind of surrounded by this bright green forest that looks like it's super healthy. Fast forward 2 years, and the same landscape in the middle of an extreme drought year, 2021, drought we're still in, unfortunately. And again, you can sort of see the treated area, which looks a little bit less healthy than the surrounding landscape, which is these, bright trees, really densely packed together. They look super healthy. But this is what it looked like after the Bootleg Fire, which is a wildfire, swept through the area.
So this is a very dramatic effect of, maybe we can, it's effectively an inversion of the previous image. What was brown is green, and what was green is brown. I hope that's coming across. And we spoke to the Nature Conservancy. They shared an image with us that is taken from right along this road here, right in the middle of the image, where there is, this area had been treated with mechanical thinning and prescribed burn. This area was untreated. And what that looks like from an overhead picture is this. On the left, both mechanically thinned and burned. On the right, no treatment. So prescribed fire is an incredibly powerful tool, but it cannot be used everywhere. You might be a little bit nervous if someone was lighting a fire, in between your house and your neighbors. So that is when we can have goats come to the rescue. One of my favorite animals.
So this was a photograph that I took just this year near Point Reyes. And it is somebody who is advertising their goat herd to use to clear defensible space, which is the process of basically making sure that the vegetation that's surrounding structures, houses, other things like that, has vegetation that is tamped down and less flammable. And if you ever go into the Oakland Hills in late summer or fall, you will have probably seen the goat herd that is doing just that.
And goat contractors report being in incredibly high demand, having trouble fulfilling all the needs of their clients. But importantly, in 2019, goats were part of saving the Reagan Presidential Library. They had been brought in to do some grazing, and according to news reports, some of the Caprine contractors included one Vincent Van Gogh, a Selena Gomez, and Goatsart. And they helped save exhibits, including an Air Force One jet and part of the Berlin Wall. Just one more picture of a goat. So we can see the effects, we can see the progression of their grazing.
Right, so again, back to satellite imagery. And what you're seeing here is the actual thinning of the vegetation that was done by the goats. So this was May of 2019. And wherever you see light color, that's where the goats have grazed. And the darker areas are vegetation that's in a more untreated state. And then over the course of a month, the goat herd was moved to different slopes and then thinned out that vegetation. And so this is a high-resolution satellite, high-resolution image taken by one of our SkySat satellites, which instead of being this size, they're about the size of a dorm fridge. And this is pre-fire, so you can see the treated area lighter colored around the library itself, which is on top of a hill. One of the things that's a little disorienting about satellite imagery is it flattens everything, but it's actually a pretty significant hill. And then the surrounding darker areas are untreated. And this is what it looked like post-fire, with the black charred landscape, and then basically reached the thinned area, and just like the prescribed burn, wasn't able to move further, even though naturally fire goes up because heat rises, and left the majority of the library intact.
And there were firefighters involved, but again, this work in advance made it easier for them to do their job. And if you want to see what it looks like today from the ground, you can see this singed landscape, but an intact library on the top. Now I want to talk about home safety. In wildfires, 90% of the buildings that are destroyed or damaged in a fire are set on fire by embers or by fires lighted by other embers, not the main front of the fire. This is an image from a home built in a lab, and one side is built with fire-resistant materials, and the other is not. I want you to especially notice the fire coming out of the attic. A common way that houses catch on fire is when embers enter vents and actually light the house on fire from the inside. One of the easiest things you can do to retrofit your home and harden it from fires is to put mesh coverings over vents so that embers cannot get in. And this is an image from the campfire. This is an image of paradise after the fire moved through. This is another false color image. So when you see bright red, just imagine bright green. The trees that are gray and brown are scorched, but the bright red ones are still healthy. And this was really the most dramatic recent loss of homes and lives in a fire. I went to Paradise the day after the fire moved through, and I came into town on the Skyway here, which is the diagonal road that is moving down. And after getting in, I pulled off, I believe it was right about here, just to survey some of the damage. And I took this picture there. This is a Red Cross worker surveying some of the damage. And I find going to fire-affected areas really difficult. Some of these images can be difficult to look at, but I really think it's important to spend time thinking about the lessons that fires can teach us when we're not in the midst of a fire, to try to do as much as we can to prevent this in the future. If you look at some of these trees here, there's still some greenery on the trees. You can also see that in a satellite image. Now, again, I believe that this was the area where I took that fire. I couldn't say for sure. But you know, these homes are all destroyed, but they are, in some cases, surrounded by trees that are still green and still standing. And so what that tells me was that these trees, these homes were more flammable than the trees. And that's something that we can try to take steps to address. These big box stores that you see here on the upper right, those are there were reports of people taking shelter in those, and those are probably saved by being surrounded by concrete or being constructed differently, or maybe a combination of both. Here's another image of a neighborhood where most of the homes are destroyed. I spoke a couple months ago with researchers from the University of California and the Forest Service who had studied what factors seemed to influence whether a building survived the campfire or didn't. And one of the things they said was most important was how close the building was to the next building that was on fire. And homes that were not on fire had a protective effect on the homes near them.
That's actually, thank you for wearing your masks. And it's very similar to dealing with a virus, where when you wear a mask, you're not just protecting yourself, but you're also protecting your neighbors. So thank you very much.
So we can see here where these homes that are still standing are kind of all clustered around each other. Another factor that they found was important was defensible space and whether there was overhanging tree canopy. Here's a home that survived. It doesn't seem to have any overhanging tree canopies. I don't know for a fact if that helped it survive, but it was one of the factors that they found helped buildings survive. And now, no discussion of fire and its impacts is complete without talking about smoke. Robert, this is a picture you took.
So this was taken on September 9th, 2020, at noon. And so that was the day, if you were in the Bay Area at the time, when we had that very dark, incredibly red, terrifying sky that looked like we could have been on Mars.
And in 2020, that year, we saw 60 days of wildfire smoke in our air. And that's up from just about a decade ago. It was like 10 to 20 days a year. Some Stanford researchers believe that wildfire smoke is the primary way most Californians will feel the effects of climate change. This is the same view, but from space. Notice how thick, how opaque this smoke is. It covers the entire California coast. So this is the time to prepare for smoky days. Get an air filter, change the filter, get your N95 masks, protect your kids, protect your elders, protect people who are in fragile health. Have a plan for the smoky days. And if I can just put in a plug for prescribed fire smoke, sometimes people do not like, they are upset when prescribed fires are set in their area because it does put smoke into the air. Every acre of California has the potential to burn at some point. You are making a good trade-off. You are investing in the future by doing prescribed burns because that smoke is much more manageable, it's much less intense, it's much less toxic. And here, we've shared a lot of information. We're gonna pause, take questions from note cards. If you want to ask a question live, you can wave your hand, and Paloma will hand you a mic. No one has to ask questions, but as a backdrop, we have a lovely image of Yosemite. All right, all good? Well, now we're going to talk about some practical tips to prepare for wildfires. And I've organized these by time span, how much free time you have to spend on this. So one of the most important things you can do is to sign up for local emergency alerts. We're going to share information with you after this event, and there's detailed links about where exactly you can go to sign up for alerts. As I mentioned, you can replace your indoor air filter, or you can make your own box fan air filter. We've done stories at KQED on how to do that. Another thing that is important to do is to call your neighbors. Anyone who might have trouble evacuating in an emergency, reach out to them. You can ask them about their evacuation plans. You know, when in the intense moments of an emergency, neighbors really need to help neighbors. Emergency services are often overwhelmed and might not be able to take someone out. Take someone out in an evacuation sense. More things you can do in an hour or less. You can call your local conservation district, your local fire safe council, or your local wildfire nonprofit, and ask if you can schedule a visit to your site to learn how to better prepare your home and property. You can, if your home is threatened, you can create a video walkthrough on your cell phone or through another device just to inventory your belongings. This will really help with insurance claims. And back up your important documents to the cloud so that you're not reliant on physical hard drives. Things you can do in a day or less. Walk around your home and clear any flammable material within 5 feet. On red flag days, this is especially important. If a really bad fire hits, it's probably going to happen on a red flag day. Those are the times when conditions are really ripe to burn. Everyone should have a go bag. Make or refresh your family member's kit. And there's good advice at this URL, ready.gov/kit. If you live in an area where the power gets shut off to try to prevent fires sparked by utility companies, which is many of us who live in the North Bay, purchase a portable power bank or to charge your cell phone and any important medical equipment. And if you have a generator, make sure that is functioning properly. Here are things that you can do in a day or less. Think about your emergency plan. Do you know a couple ways out of your neighborhood? Can you clean up your yard so that it's less flammable? Can you replace your vents and screenings with non-combustible mesh? And then if emergency services needed to get to you, can they see your address? Can they access you safely? All of this stuff is really important in an intense situation. And then these are some things that take time. I think that as Californians, we are slowly evolving our relationship with fire, but this is a process, and part of that process is just through conversations that we have. You can talk to your friends and family about wildfire resilience. There are many organizations that assist during emergency times. You can volunteer or you can support those organizations, and you can learn about and you can support good fire and indigenous-led fire in your area. We've talked about how fires are getting worse in these last couple years, but this is a problem that reaches back decades. A couple years ago, I reported a retrospective for the 25th anniversary of the Oakland Hills fire, and this is an image taken after that fire. That fire taught us a lot of lessons, but they're lessons that we still need to keep learning. In reporting that fire, I visited this memorial that is along the roadside near Caldecott Tunnel. It's a memorial to the people who lost their lives in that fire. It's surrounded by a very beautiful fire-resistant garden. So congratulations to the person who gets to take home the succulent. I think it's not easy to think about fires and what they have claimed, especially when we're not seeing active bad fires. But I want to thank you all for being here and thinking about this stuff, in a non-emergency setting, because there are lessons that the fires of the past can teach us so that we can make the future better. And I just want to thank you again all so much for coming out tonight. We're happy to take questions again if any have filtered through. Yep, we have a lady in the second row back.
Hi there. I have a question about which animals are best at knowing wildfires are coming, or like what the impacts on wildlife are.
Wildlife? That is a great question. I do not know what animals are best at knowing that wildlife is coming, or wildfire is coming. Wildlife is better at avoiding fires that are lower in intensity. So ones that are, burning in extreme conditions, driven by winds. Some animals do lose their lives, but birds can often fly away. Small mammals may be able to go underground. Larger mammals can just kind of run away. But during really intense fires, some wildlife does lose their life. But they, not necessarily, right? Like these are fire adapted landscapes. Animals have a way of making it through.
Thank you so much for the presentation. This is really powerful work you all are doing. I work with a coalition of organizations, including fire survivors and folks with disabilities who are navigating the failures of the energy system. And there's a character in the story that didn't show up much in this work. And I was wondering if you could talk about massive transmission lines, failures of PG&E, and how that relates. And for I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, but with the images, is there a imagery difference from a fire that you can tell is caused by a electrical failure, a failure of PG&E, versus one that's more of a natural creation? Can you see that from above?
You really wouldn't be able to see that. You can't really distinguish different types of ignition. A couple things that you can use satellite imagery for. One is to directly see how close the vegetation is to power lines, and basically know when it's time to prune. Another one, and again, that's where this sort of monitoring capability is very useful, is knowing the condition of the landscape over the course of the fire season. And so if you're taking an image every day, you can see, okay, this was extremely verdant in winter during the rainy season, and it's dried out. And we know that nobody has come in and cleared it because it's just been this kind of gradual decrease in vegetation cover. And so there are companies that at least have been experimenting with, I don't know if it's operational yet, using the data to be able to sort of predict which areas are most at risk for fire. And you can also do vegetation monitoring. Again, by looking at things over time, different vegetation greens up and senesces, which is getting browner, in different patterns. And so you can tell different types of vegetation, and that gives you information about how much fuel might be in that area, and that helps you predict spread of fires.
And to answer your other question, I have not done a lot of reporting on utilities, but I would be happy to email you after and direct you to some really good reporting from some colleagues on that subject. Yes, gentlemen.
Excuse me, sorry.
So in regards to specifically satellite imagery, and I know that there's a lot of technology to take those that imagery and do post-processing, and have algorithms that can generate target data or target areas where action can be taken, in a general sense. And I'm wondering if with your experience with collecting all of the infrared satellite data, are there any current agencies or efforts to take that data and do post-processing to say, okay, here are target areas where controlled burns would be most effective?
That's absolutely the type of application that's out there. And Planet's data fits within a larger ecosystem of remote sensing data that's also tied to what's called in situ data, so data that's collected on the ground. And one very active area of research is doing that modeling of forest health and vegetation health, as well as vegetation type, which all affects how fires can spread. Another really important application is post-fire analysis. So one thing we didn't talk about at all is that in these landscapes after they burn, which are often very, very hilly and steep landscapes, there's an incredible landslide risk. And teams go out, they're called burned area emergency remediation, that go into the landscape in these fires and stabilize the slopes. And so knowing where the most severe burns were, and combining that with topographic maps to know where the steepest land is, and then sort of like viewing the watersheds to know where a mud flow might go. We'll go and start like planning and putting mesh down and things like that to try to prevent those from happening. And even with the most severe fires, not only are you stripping away all the vegetation, which would stabilize the slope, but actually makes the top layer of soil hydrophobic. And so water doesn't soak in, it actually beads up on the top and just rolls down. And so it's this perfect storm of like horrible conditions for landslides. And so it's really important as quickly as possible after a fire has been contained to go and start treating that. So that's another one of the possible applications.
We have some questions written in by cards. Thank you for sending these in. One is, what is preventing California from acquiring all or new homes to be retrofitted or built to protect them against fires? New homes are built to a higher fire standard than they used to. But some of this also comes down to cost and political will. So there are cheap and easy steps to retrofit your home, to harden your home, and there are some things that are much more expensive, like replacing roofs or replacing decks. So there are some carrots and sticks out there, but you can decide if you think it's enough. There are some movements in this area.
And if you go to Oakland in the hills, the houses that are lower down in North Oakland near the Berkeley border, they're all wood. Everything above that is concrete and fire-resistant materials, because everything lower down was built before the fire survived. Everything further up burned and was replaced by more fire-resistant materials.
And a lot of that is determined by local governments. So if you are passionate about that, speaking with your local representatives, city council, people, at the county level, can help. Can BLM, Bureau of Land Management, or Forest Service logging policies affect wildfire? Yes. In logging, commercial logging, there is a just economic incentive to take the bigger trees. The bigger trees are the ones that are resistant to fire and that hold the most carbon. And the smaller trees are less profitable and more prone to burning. Forest management does not have to happen that way, but there is a strong economic incentive to overcut. What policy changes would be most effective in mitigating fuel accumulation? That is a great question, and boy, do I wish I knew the answer exactly. More support for the kind of projects that we talked about, thinning and prescribed fire, and attention given to, is the harvest that's happening sustainable. There's also a increased push to make the small little material that's the smaller trees and twigs find ways to make that marketable, to turn that into marketable products.
And one thing that we touched on with the cyc and marsh imagery there's sort of a psychological response to forests. And we have sort of grown up to think that those super dense, super green forests are healthy, and they're not. And so there's a little bit of a tension between a lot of environmental organizations and a lot of advocates for wilderness who want to preserve that type of wilderness and not the more open type. And there's a resistance to some of the techniques, especially the mechanical clearing.
Yeah.
And it's something that sort of I've come around on as I've learned about this topic over 20 years or so, where, you know, it sounds bad, like to send a crew with mechanized equipment to clear out a wilderness area, but it's actually creating a healthier forest, and a forest that's going to remain intact much longer and have the ability to withstand these changes.
We are, all of us, too young to remember what forests are really supposed to look like. So many of us think that the more trees, the healthier the forest. And largely that is not the case. You know, having fewer, bigger trees, and trees of all ages, much more resilient to drought, to pests, and to wildfire. Yes, Paloma, question in the front?
Could you talk to what is happening at the state level for fire prevention at this point?
In the last couple of years, a huge amount of money has gone into the field of fire prevention, about 1.5, if I have everything right, $1.5 billion to be spent over the last 2 years. A lot of that is being awarded in grants to organizations that do project work. It is not all allocated, and you know that's partially a product of there hasn't traditionally been a ton of money to do this work. So I hope we see, you know, I hope we see the tide changing, and that there's more, and that preventing catastrophic fires feels as important and urgent as putting them out.
And a thing that I'd like to expand on that is, it's not really just the state. I mean, this is something that really needs to be dealt with from the national level down to the individual level. Like the research lab, the Sycan Marsh, that's owned by the Nature Conservancy, that's private land. Adjacent to it is privately held land for timber harvesting, and that's all surrounded by Forest Service land. So, you know, the fire doesn't care who owns it, it's gonna go through regardless. So it's really something that requires a lot of coordination and a lot of cooperation at multiple levels.
Are there any charitable organizations that you recommend that we might be able to donate to help prevent wildfires in the future?
Thank you for that question. You know, I would not feel comfortable recommending a charitable organization without sort of researching it extensively, but I would ask yourself, when you see a fire or an emergency in your area, who do you hear people are getting help from? And I would concentrate on those organizations. Are there any last questions? We are pretty close to time. Yes.
Thank you. This was great. My question is, you talked about indigenous and cultural burning and prescribed fire. What are the main barriers and opportunities that you see in California to doing more of that, and also applying some of the practices and knowledge that indigenous people still have on this issue?
That is such a great question. There are some historical barriers. Traditionally, fire has been in the hands of fire agencies. So in California, that is specifically CAL FIRE and the Forest Service. We are in the midst of big changes in that front, where the expertise of cultural burners is being recognized in legislation, and some protection is being given to them to restore native burning practices. And where can we best learn? You wanted to know where to learn more about that? There are Good Fire. If you Google like Good Fire Alliance, there's like kind of a network of people who are either in or in close dialogue with the indigenous community, learning from them about how they traditionally did things and trying to apply those lessons to current fire stewardship.
And some of the obstacles, smoke is one that we mentioned. I think our perception of wilderness, and wilderness is somehow being untouched. And then also, and this is a very reasonable fear, prescribed burns can go out of control sometimes.
It's true. 90, I think it's in studies, 99.5% of the time they stay exactly where they're supposed to. That minor amount of the time they may go over, but nothing is damaged. And then in very rare instances, something gets damaged. And so that is a real thing, and it should not be ignored. However, as we've talked about, trying to restore the way that this land was cared for tens of thousands of years leads to a protective effect. All right, we are at 8:02. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. It is just a joy to see faces in person. Any other questions that you have, email me, email us. I'll be happy to get back to you. And we are going to be sticking around, so please come up and say hi, ask any other questions that you like. Just thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Whoops, wait, that was good.